Wind Cave doesn't boom, doesn't wail. It doesn't play host to ghost lights or angry rocks that tumble in the night. It whispers. It exhales. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, it listens. Under the prairie of South Dakota, just inside the Black Hills, Wind Cave unspools itself in coils of stone. Tight, stubborn passages carved in limestone over millions of years. The surface offers no warning. There are no jagged cliffs or looming entrances. Just tall, soft grasses that shift even when the wind is still. Wildlife moves lightly across the land. Elk, fox, the occasional owl. You wouldn't know you're walking above one of the most intricate cave systems on Earth. Local tribes, especially the Lakota, have long regarded Wind Cave as sacred. To them, it is a place of emergence, Maka One-Eye, the breathing earth. In their stories, the first people came from within it, not from above. The breath of the cave made the surface livable. And so, the breath became sacred too. The early American settlers heard the wind before they saw the cave. There was no dramatic opening, no gaping mouth. Just a small hole in the rock, barely wide enough to fit a man's arm. And yet, it howled and hissed, sometimes blowing hats off explorers, sometimes sucking them inside. A game of lungs and pressure, of balance. No one entirely understood why the wind changed directions, even when the weather did not. In truth, they still don't. The U.S. government officially recognized Wind Cave in 1903, and it became America's 7th national park, its first cave-based one. Explorers began mapping its passages, though every year brought new branches, new corridors that hadn't been there before, or so they claimed. By 1963, more than 60 miles had already been charted, and yet even conservative estimates predicted the cave's true length to be tenfold that. Today, over 150 miles are mapped, and even park officials quietly admit it may never be fully known. This story begins in 1963, at the end of October, just before the frost made the plains brittle. A season of thinning, of days shorter than their shadows, and of air that seemed to hold its breath. That year, a local naturalist named Eddie Tallman, age 29, disappeared inside Wind Cave during an unofficial expedition. He went in with a small group, 3 others, all known to him, all competent in their own ways. No sign of struggle, no broken lines, no wreck supplies. They were not hobbyist thrill seekers. They were not looking for gold or ghosts. They were curious, yes, but simple, responsible even. Eddie had volunteered with the park for nearly 6 seasons, setting trail flags and distance markers, helping with bat counts. The kind of man you send alone with a clipboard and flashlight and expect to come back with notes on alfalfa growth. When they failed to return, the park conducted a preliminary search. Quiet, short, out of courtesy. It found nothing. 15 days after the disappearance, a ranger named Bradley Coates found a partial notebook tucked between 2 thin slabs of limestone near sublevel 34B, an unmapped and now restricted zone deep within the lower pitch corridors. The notebook had been carefully wrapped in rough burlap, sealed along the edges with melted candle wax. The paper inside was warped but legible. The entries stopped abruptly. Inside the front flap, written in shaky, almost cramped, lettering, was one sentence. If you start hearing the count, do not turn. Do not stop. Up is always a lie. The pages before it are less ominous. Observational. Dates, compass bearings, quick sketches of cave walls and slope angles, some measurements in the shaky handwriting of amateurs trying to look official. One page just said, "Smells like copper," even though nothing's wet. Another page, a spiral drawn 9 times, but never named. There is no formal record of what else was found that day, or if anything was. Just a line in the Ranger Activity Report. Area closed due to unstable conditions. Archives pending. No photos. No gear. No bodies. No David. No Jay. No Marina. Not even footprints. Eddie Tallman disappeared into nothing. And what came back was a notebook that seemed like it had been waiting longer than 15 days. The burlap was hand-stitched. The wax was coal root stained, the kind used in underground candles from before 1940. It wasn't just the absence that disturbed the older rangers. It was the sense, the quiet, unspoken sense, that the notebook hadn't been left there. It had been returned. The cave is not marked as haunted. Nothing screams, There are no tour guide signs warning of foul play or curses. Wind Cave is still active, open, government-run. Families walk its wide, safe corridors. Temperature, 54 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent. Lighting, artificial, low warm. But even today, rangers note the same three phenomena, recorded time and again. The air moves when it shouldn't. The deeper paths shift subtly over time. And on rare nights, the inventory doesn't match. Candles left on counters are found melted but unused, or appear where none were before. You may not notice what's missing, but you might notice what has returned. Eddie's name is no longer listed on official search and rescue memorials. His file resided in a drawer marked unsubstantiated for years until it was removed from circulation altogether. What remains is the story. And the cave, of course. It remains. No longer indifferent. Not hostile. Not kind. Just there. Remembering. There are theories. Gas pockets. Psychological fatigue. Unseen panic traveling in silence, like sound through stone. But the old Lakota stories don't try to explain. They only warn. Not to bring fire too deeply. Not to speak your name more than once. And never, never to count the turns. Because if the cave starts counting with you, it means you're not walking alone. It started as something harmless, perhaps even hopeful. Eddie Tallman, in the fall of 1963, was finishing his 6th straight year volunteering with the Wind Cave Nature Service. He was not a showy caver. He didn't crave attention or publish theories. But he noticed things, like the way small breezes seemed to momentarily reverse when you passed through certain corridors, and how sections of the route labeled impassable in 1957 now appeared, worn down, as if someone or something had kept using them. His notes didn't raise alarms. He wrote them like field observations, neutral, quiet, deeply precise. October 11th, second bend beyond fairgrounds doesn't hold echo. Could be blind curtain or pinched wind cell. October 14th, found 2 candles dumped inside Gallery B, burnt down to wax pools. Park inventory says last used in 1939, but there's no soot. Most dismissed these thoughts as quirky ranger trivia, except for 3 people. 3 who believed enough to follow him in. Marina Tallman, 24. Eddie's cousin, home from college that semester. Anthropology student. Rarely spoke unless it mattered. She'd helped Eddie trace old indigenous maps printed from ghosted tracings taken in 19th century field books. Her specialty was memory architecture, how places taught people to move through them, and how those people responded. She'd written papers on petroglyph shapes that repeated across time, including spirals that reversed direction in odd seasons. Jay Algernon, 20, Forest Service intern, eager but grounded, had completed more than 30 supervised descents in regional cave systems by the time he agreed to follow Eddie on the 27th. He said yes because he respected the cave, not feared, not loved, but respected. According to a ranger's recollection, Jay wasn't the kind to lose himself to stories. David Elmer, 34, freelance photojournalist, known in Rapid City for covering wildfires and rare birds. David was invited for one reason: proof. Eddie believed any discovery, if it mattered, should be seen. He promised David 2 things: a new tunnel and total solitude with it before anyone else got the shot. On the morning they entered Wind Cave, October 27, 1963, they had no permit, no radio, and no supervisor logging their route. They left a scrawled note taped behind a park map case, looping from Fairgrounds east to Kelly's Alley. Back by sundown. ETA 1730. Eddie, Marina, Jay, David. It was never removed. The wind pulled one corner loose that evening. A ranger retaped it. The entrance they used that morning was Gate 4, a service access stair through the Central Trail loop. It was public but rarely used in colder seasons. A low stone corridor, brushed with orange dust and lines of sweat, where the rock held heat through autumn. Jay was the last to descend. He paused halfway down, resting a hand on the wall. Years later, a park employee would retell what he said to himself. "Why does it feel like I've been down here longer than I've been alive?" They lit their candles. They moved quietly. Their route took them through known areas for the first 2 miles. Stable ground. Rough guides. The sloped spiral path just past Half Moon Gate was marked as an outgrowth tunnel and used since 1954 due to structural faulting. But Eddie believed it had opened again. Caves inhale when left alone. He wrote in his last intact notebook entry. The trail going forward marked the turn into unknown territory with a small pile of red stones. Jay said it was strange, the way all 5 sat perfectly balanced and dustless. No one recalled placing them. Eddie shrugged. Either we walk forward, or the caves draw on the map for nothing. The first few hours were uneventful. As a group, they moved in practiced rhythm. Jay checked compass and rope. Marina recorded sketches and candle life. Eddie took bearing notes and adjusted path markers. David trailed behind with his camera, documenting walls, footing, and expressions. None of them looked afraid. Not yet. They named the first new clearing Gallery Rome, because a cluster of cracked mineral lines along the ceiling resembled ladder steps. It was here the first odd behavior occurred, not from the cave, but from the group. It was small. Jay paused unexpectedly, doubling back to check the depth of a shadow under a crawl space. When asked why, he said he thought he saw something curving beneath the rock. He called it bone-colored twine, moving like breath. But the space? Empty. Later, they found themselves looping past the same chamber, even though their compass said they hadn't turned. Eddie noted that the floor, partially dusted in chalky sediment, held only 3 sets of footprints, not 4, and each footprint set only passed once. Jay felt his voice catch in his throat. Marina ran her fingers along the wall for reassurance. The temperature just changed in here, she said. The wall's sweating. Eddie put his ear against it. No sound, no hollowness. But the air shifted. Slow. Gentle. There's wind where there's no space, he murmured. That's not right. Still, they pressed on. One corridor bled into another. And somewhere along the line, they started dismissing rules in favor of instinct. David turned down his last photograph here, saying, "Can't capture silence. Not the kind this is." This was Wind Cave's true persuasion. It did not frighten, not at first. It softened. It suggested. And in that suggestion, it turned back the truths of movement, time, and even sound. By sundown, they'd reached a low-bellied chamber shaped like a half-sphere. A near-perfect parabolic room, marked with only one indentation, a turn tight into stone, narrow, spiraling. Marina hesitated. She muttered something under her breath. "I've dreamed this shape. I didn't know I had." Jay set a marker stone beside the entry. Eddie lit new candles. David took a final light exposure. And one by one, they ducked into darkness, a spiral breathing inward. A spiral, by its nature, does not move forward. It moves around. Descend one, and at first it feels simple, a drop, a path. Around the second turn, you begin to realize there's no true center, just a suggestion of direction, the illusion of choice. The passage Eddie Tallman led them into was less than 4 feet high. They crawled single file, shoulders brushing damp sandstone, candlelight trembling weakly in front of them. The flame bent backward every few feet, pushed by air that didn't follow the rules of wind or physics. As if something further in the cave was breathing out slowly, deeply, unhurried. Jay went first, Marina after him, then Eddie, then David. They moved without words, each whispering sound beneath them swallowed whole by the rock. On his recorder, Eddie murmured, 1:46 a.m. entered unknown spiral. Wall density consistent with gallery class 4. Floor unusually warm under palm. That was the last reliably audible entry. From here, things shift. Ranger Bradley Coates, the man who eventually recovered Eddie's journal, described this portion of the notes as fogged. Half-crossed lines, confused numbering, weight measurements scrawled without labels. Compass bearings that circled back on themselves, literally. A 342 degrees mark recorded 4 times on the same page, each spaced 10 minutes apart, in opposite directions. And then a new sound. The one that came after the spiral, but before they ever turned back. Counting. According to Marina's damaged sketchbook, it started faint, not inside the cave, but beyond it. Somewhere just at the perimeter of ear and thought. At first, they believed it was Jay, moving ahead calmly, marking steps. 29, 30, 31. But Jay, according to Marina and Eddie both, never spoke. His lips were dry when they caught up to him. He just kept crawling forward, lantern in front, gaze steady. David was the first to break the spell. Who's counting? No answer. It stopped when he asked. Eddie said later in the journals, the number reached 34. Then silence. Complete. As if even our breathing caused offense. They met again in a slightly larger chamber, small enough they could sit up, but not stand. Walls smooth around the edges, undisturbed. A tiny dome. Breathless stone. This was the second moment. The one they could have turned back. But David wanted just one photograph in the new chamber. A low-angle long exposure. 20 seconds max, he said. As they waited for the shutter to close, Marina noticed something ordinary and said something strange. Has anyone noticed the wax? Jay turned. What wax, Mar? She pointed to the wall. 3 lines of melted residue, parallel, vertical, like 3 candles had burned against the wall that day. But no scent, no heat, no memory of bringing them. Eddie picked up what he assumed was a spent wick, but it crumbled in his glove, brittle chalk, red-streaked, and used. Still, they waited for the camera to finish. The photo, when developed 4 days later in a ranger station, was formally labeled Blurred Image 001. In soft, distorted focus, for silhouettes are visible. But only 3 heads. The 4th stands too far back in the frame, or perhaps too close. It is robed in shadow but appears human-shaped, tall, curled forward, as if the cave wall behind them had raised a shoulder to listen. Coates noted. The figure's hands rest on nothing. Its skin is unbroken chalk. Internal shadow only. A week before the expedition, Eddie had joked about wanting a chamber named after their team. They named this one the Gallery of Breath. Even the dark has to exhale sometime, he said. They were still pretending it was harmless. On the next stretch, a narrow crawl downward in chipped tiers, Jay dropped his candle. It slipped from his pack pocket and clinked down twice. The flame kept burning. He swore it glowed for several seconds before dimming. But the light never touched the walls. None of the others saw it. When Jay retrieved it moments later, the candle was upright. Unburnt. Still cold. It didn't fall, he said quietly. It was already down there. The tapping came next. A rhythmic sound, faint as fingers on paper, brushed the walls alongside them. Water was the first excuse. Some trickle delayed in echo reach. But the tapping slowed and accelerated in response, only when they grew quiet. Marina whispered. It's listening for breaks in voices. They held silence for 2 full minutes. On Eddie's recorder, nothing. But afterward, Jay began muttering, unconscious at first. A lilt. A note. Not a song, precisely, but a pattern. A tempo. It matched the tapping. David asked what tune that was. Marina paused. I don't think it has a name, she said. I don't remember learning it. Jay, still at the back now, called ahead. We're looped. I think we just circled the same column twice. Eddie double-checked the map. Their charcoal mark was gone from the corner turn. And in its place, a faint spiral etched into the stone, fresh with wet dust. No one said anything. There was no wind now. The breath of the cave had paused. They kept walking, more out of habit than plan. 1 step. 1 candle length at a time. But the counting returned, just once, at the edge of hearing. 31, 32, then nothing. No speakers. No mouth to form sound. Only pressure, like a lowered ceiling above the soul. In his last field journal page before the ink blurred, Eddie wrote, The cave is tuned to breath. Or maybe to pattern. No exertion. No shaking. But we are heard. And that changes things. Later testimonies reconstructed their last decision that night, to rest near the marker before descending further. They agreed to sleep in shifts. They melted 1 candle to make a soft spiral ring on the ground. A soft lock, they joked. A charm. Before sleep, Marina said quietly to no one in particular, just don't count out loud. If you forget your number, you might take someone else's by mistake. Some places make you forget your direction. Wind Cave asks you to forget the difference between direction and decision. The 4 explorers, Eddie, Marina, Jay, David, had bedded down in a tight circle just inside a low chamber near the spiral descent. The space wasn't marked on any official map. Eddie noted it only as chamber with minimal echo. Low ceiling, good temperature retention. They were tired, not from distance, but from vigilance. The quiet had started to feel heavier than walking. So they made a plan, short sleep, 2 at a time. Rotate every hour. Simple. Marina and Jay took the first rest shift. Eddie and David sat opposite, turning their candles down to nubs and securing the room in their own way. David melted the final bit of wax into a spiral on the floor, a soft, symbolic lock he'd picked up from Marina's studies. Meant nothing, maybe, but it felt traced enough to mean something here. Keeps bad trails from folding back in, Marina had once said. Spirals are memory marks. Not for us, for the place. The candles burned low. Jay counted his breath until sleep found him. No one remembers who dimmed the last light. What comes after that is known only by what was found, or more accurately, what wasn't. When Eddie opened his eyes, 6 hours later, by his pocket watch, he knew without knowing. Something had changed. First, the air temperature. The chill wasn't from wind but absence, a stillness that didn't belong. Second, the echo, or rather, the lack of it. The space around him was now duller than before. Sound muted. Threadbare. He sat up. Marina still slept near the wall. Jay had shifted farther back, curled with arms across his chest. David's coat remained bunched near a stalagmite, but David himself was gone. Again. At first, Eddie thought he was simply out past the alcove. Nature call. A second photo attempt. He called softly, "David? You okay?" No answer. It was then Eddie noticed the third thing. The wall behind them had changed. What had been a low ledge, a textured outcropping of gripstone with chalk residue, was now gone. Not moved. Not broken. Gone. In its place, a fresh wall. Unmarked. No ledge. No spiral wax. No ashes. No nicks. No breaks. No scratches where they'd hung their packs. Just smooth rock, as if no one had ever sat there. Eddie stood and ran his hand along it. Wet to the touch. Cold, but not cave cold. New cold. The feeling of fresh-set concrete. Newly sealed clay. Jay stirred. Marina squinted upward, blinking into gray, silent air. "Where's the wax?" she asked softly. Jay answered, "Huh. The wax. The one David shaped." Eddie didn't answer. Marina ran her hand along the floor. It was dry, gritty, as if no flame had ever dripped onto the stone. Their soft lock, their spiral, erased. "I saw it," Marina said, more to herself now. "I drew it in. I saw it melt into the lines." On the recorder, found later, Eddie's voice is terse, sharp with disbelief. Area has reshaped. No evidence of sleep sign. Wall structure altered completely. Request theory for interior morphogenesis. That phrase, interior morphogenesis, became infamous among cave researchers in the following years, argued over and picked apart like a fossil. Most believed Eddie was describing a hallucination. He was too intelligent, they said, too educated to mean it literally. But the recorder clicks off without correcting itself. Jay refused to go back the way they'd come. He claimed, and later wrote in journal fragments, that he watched the wall grow. Not collapse, not cave in, not settle. Grow. He described it like watching breath solidify. A vapor. A shape among moisture that gained hardness just past the corner of his eye. Not in real time, but over time. Like it was waiting to know where we'd stop. Then covering the seam. Eddie rejected the idea, chalking it up to sleep deprivation and trapped air. But when David didn't return after 15 minutes, Eddie stopped arguing. They spread out briefly, each taking a different arm of the forked tunnel ahead. Carved in dust at the left turn, a small wax line, faint but deliberate. 3 inches long. Fresh. Still soft. No heat source. No candle used. Just wax. Without cause. That's when Marina found the photo. David's camera, still strapped to his side pack, had been set in the center of a half circle of pebbles. Not dropped. Not placed lazily. Arranged. The lens faced downward, shutter half depressed. Inside, a blank exposure. Eddie removed the film cartridge carefully, as trained, rolled it into its protective tin, and slid it into his own pack. David's coat and bag held everything else. Accounted for. Clean. Even his lighter, a silver Zippo Marina had gifted him, lay atop his coat, half open. Still full of fluid. Still warm. After debate, they moved forward again. Not out of confidence. Out of necessity. Marina's words were written in her journal days later, but likely spoken then. There's no way out of something that reshapes behind you. Eddie began leading again. Jay lagged quietly behind, occasionally glancing up at smooth ceilings that now felt too low, as if they'd lowered since arrival. Marina watched the walls more than the path. "I think we're passing through our own map," she said. "Not a copy. Just retread lines." Jay stopped once to press his fingers into the wall. Pulling them away, he found 3 faint indentations. Finger-sized, but much longer than his own. That night, camped in a narrower space with no ledge to mark or candle to leave, they made no spiral. No one wanted to. Instead, Marina traced a new shape in ash across the stone, a reverse spiral curling inward, ending in a point, a closed loop. "This is not a guide," she said. "It's a warning." What she didn't say aloud, but added later in the margins of her sketchbook, was this: "I think this spiral is watching us." They began to understand, by the second night, that the dark wasn't just pressing close, it was watching. Eddie had been certain the corridor past the wax-slick wall wasn't on any known cave chart, and yet it obeyed familiar patterns. Smooth wall curvature, slight floor tilt, a classic cave scroll. They used to joke, a winding stretch that loops tight before returning to where it began. Except this one didn't loop. It coiled. The group called it the thread needle, thin, low, and persistent. A claustrophobic ribbon of limestone and shadow that demanded one thing above all: obedience. You don't choose how fast to go. You crawl, or you wait. Jay entered first. Then Marina. Then Eddie. David had not returned, not in name or shape. Eddie described the thread needle with medical precision in a tape log, sublevel 4C. Advanced spiral constriction. Requires single-file progression. Thermal shift noted on entrance. Temperature variance, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Air moist. Trace mineral scent. Possible human breath simulation. It was the last log with full sentences. They crawled for over 15 minutes. The spiral grew tighter every third body length, like some designer was testing the edges of comfort. Not danger, just intimacy with the stone. The second twist featured cold breath on Jay's neck. Twice, he turned back. No one was there. Marina confirmed he hadn't stopped. Eddie, behind her, said he also heard something, not a whisper. Something structured, a form inside sound. And then, again, came the counting. Only now, the numbers went backward. Faint, female sounding, but brittle. Not Marina's voice. Too far back. 17, 16, 15. 3 numbers, then silence. Jay's crawl slowed. Eddie told him, gently, to keep moving. He did. But 3 turns later, he felt a tug at his ankle, just enough to raise his heartbeat. He spun. Nothing. Eddie reassured him. This cave echoes intent, not movement. Don't start thinking in reverse. Eddie's candle flickered as the air reversed its tug, just for a moment. Forward, then back. A breath, drawn inward. Coming out of the spiral, the room enlarged, not enough to stand, but enough to kneel and straighten his back. Jay was the first into the clearing. Marina followed. Then Eddie. And then Marina again. She blinked. Confused. Eddie scooted backward, surprised to find her behind him. I just followed you, she said. I was in front. Jay studied her face. Her face was pale. Eddie ran his hands along the ground. 3 sets of palm smudges. Not 4. And the spiral they'd exited from had sealed. Not collapsed. Not vanished. But turned. Its mouth, a smooth, central pivot, had rotated. Like a sealed iris. No more opening. Only wall. Marina dropped her pack and removed a long length of red string, twined and faded. She began tying it to a rock column just outside the last chamber. Thread logic, she called it once in a paper, a symbolic wayfinding method in folklore more than science. Used in labyrinth myths. Ariadne's code. Culturally unreliable, but emotionally stabilizing. She tied a knot every 10 paces. Read against gray stone like a minor injury, a line that said, "We were here. We deserve return." On the 3rd corner, Marina stopped to make a knot. Then, without realizing it, she began knotting again. Same rope, same distance. Jay called to her. You just tied that. She stared down. The knot was already there. She didn't remember passing it. She didn't remember passing anyone. They stopped after an hour. The spiral corridor behind them had disappeared again. No echo, no wall they could recognize. Just smooth passage, winding into another chamber. And still, only 3 of them moved. Eddie no longer asked where David went. He already knew he was ahead. Somewhere. Or maybe behind. The wax trail had failed. Marina's thread was impossibly tangled, though she had worked with precise loops. Now it hung limp, tied in the wrong order, a line that collapsed inward instead of stretching back. She crushed it in her fingers, threw it against the wall, only to hear it land farther away than she expected. Jay muttered something. Eddie turned. What? Jay was counting again. Not fast. Not loud. 5, 4, 3. Eddie snapped his fingers in front of him. Jay blinked. Paused. Sorry, I wasn't. Then nothing else. In the next chamber, Eddie spotted something new. A long spiral drawn into stone, this one wide, not coiled. Unnatural, the size of a table. Engraved crudely, as if with a chunk of bone or stone. Dust lay undisturbed. No footprints, no brush marks. And at the spiral's center, scrawled in burnt wax, return. Marina ran her hand over the word. She whispered, I've never seen that script before, but I understand it. Jay added softly, it's Bengali. My grandmother's family. She used that on prayer markings. Eddie wrote the phrase and mirrored it in his journal. 2 spirals, one curving out, one in. 2 paths. One return, one refusal. They lit a new candle. Watched it burn without twisting. The air didn't shift. The smoke went perfectly up. Marina knelt close to the flame. Studied it. Whatever was breathing here has stopped. Jay asked her to repeat that. She didn't. In his recovered notebook, Eddie left this margin note in shaky graphite. When the spiral leads you back to yourself, you begin to realize something else has already taken your place. By then, even he was speaking slower. No timestamps. No log structure. Just thoughts. Jay barely spoke. His eyes followed the flicker of flame like something else lived inside it. None of them had dreamed in 2 nights. Their bodies should have collapsed by now under the strain, the cold, the stillness. But the cave held them upright, as if they were being moved, gently, like notes kept on a rhythm. Later, much later, Marina would write just one line in the page marked spiral below us. There was no middle, but we kept following the idea of one. Grief underground is quiet. It doesn't weep or scream. It waits. By the evening of the 3rd day, they reached a chamber they hadn't mapped, but recognized. There, in the dim amber glow of failing candles and shallow breath, lay David's coat. Folded, not discarded or dropped, but set, arranged. Beside it, a silver Zippo lighter, partially open, still glossy from warmth. 3 spent candles ringed the coat in a perfect triangle. Evenly spaced, completely burnt to the base. The room was otherwise undisturbed. No scuff marks, no signs of panic or fall, just a clearing. Prepared, remembered. Jay didn't speak. Eddie didn't ask. The tape recorder, strapped now to Eddie's belt, crackled when lifted. A series of faint breaths. One isolated click. Then silence again. Marina knelt beside the small camera that had been set gently against the base of the coat. The same one David had used since the day they entered. She picked it up. Shook it slightly. Inside, one undeveloped frame. Later analysis revealed not a blur, not blackness, but overexposure. White, like someone had pointed into a light source that didn't exist underground. He didn't leave, Marina whispered. He was taken politely. Jay looked at her without speaking. That was the moment he began counting again. Softly, at first unconsciously. 9, 8, 7. The words trailed off his tongue like a heatless melody. Eddie snapped his fingers in front of him. Jay, he said firmly. You're doing it again. Jay blinked. Paused. Sorry. It helps me breathe. The chamber they had entered featured unusual acoustics. Even soft steps sounded distant, displaced. Sound didn't return from your voice. It folded inward, as if the cave was keeping it. Eddie tried marking the chamber with wax. A spiral and 3 lines, as before. But when they returned minutes later from a short exploration of the next fork, the spiral had changed. It faced the other way. The 3 lines were now 4. None of them had stopped to alter anything. Minutes, maybe hours later, time was elastic by now, they passed through a gallery of thin columns. Long mineral rods, side by side like organ pipes. There were 31 of them. Marina counted. Jay counted too, but he only said 34, 33, 32, as if marking something else entirely. David's name was not spoken again. Not because they forgot, but because mention of him felt like an invitation. In the last leftward fork of that chamber, Marina found something carved deep into the wall. Not etched, pressed. Marks left not by tools, but perhaps fingernails or bone. Symbols, spiral-based again, but with crossbars dissecting their flow. Broken loops, interrupted arcs. In the center, in charred wax, was a word she didn't recognize, though it felt familiar in her body when she read it. A funeral word in Bengali that translates to oblation. A ritual for offering to the dead, or to the forgotten. Jay stared at it silently, and after a long breath finally spoke again. My grandmother used to press oil into rice with that word. Before our dead were buried. He didn't question why it was here. No one did. Later, in her return journal, Marina wrote, "The cave gives back what we bring. But it keeps what decides to stay." David stayed. Or something became him. Jay, by then, had grown exceedingly still. Not catatonic, attentive, but detached. He would not eat. Would not drink. He walked with them. Obeyed instructions. But his candle, Marina noted, never flickered. It stood unnaturally tall. Bright. Still. As if it wasn't burning at all. Eddie suggested doubling back. To follow their thread line, retrace. But Marina pointed out the problem with that path. The knot we tied twice, we reached it again. 3 times now. But we've never turned around. Jay offered a suggestion in his low, sleep-heavy voice. Maybe we're not turning. Maybe the cave is spiraling around us. None of them responded. But Eddie's fingers trembled that night when he tried lighting a new candle with the Zippo. It sputtered. Wouldn't catch. Marina kneeled beside him, struck a match. The new candle burned, but the flame arched sideways, pulled gently toward the tunnel ahead. "Down," she said. "This place wants us down." That night they resettled in a space shaped like a bowl, smooth-lined, dry, warm enough to allow deep rest. Jay fell asleep sitting straight. Eddie turned the recorder back on briefly. Soft breath filled the background. He spoke only once. The only thing left from the tape recovered later. There's no longer wind. But the air still shifts, like the lungs of something asleep have just begun to dream. They all dreamed that night. The same image, different for each person, but always centered on David. For Eddie, David sitting calmly in a field, holding a candle that wept wax, but not flame. For Marina, David calling her name underwater. For Jay, David counting bricks. One by one, backward. The room did not feel haunted. It felt patient, which somehow was worse. When they woke, Jay was smiling faintly. Eyes open. Still. "It's ready now," he said. He didn't explain what or who. And the spiral on the opposite wall revealed a new passage, long, wide, and gently sloping downward. It hadn't been there the night before. At least, that's what they told themselves. Marina stopped once to trace her fingers along the freshly revealed limestone. She found something under the surface. A groove in the shape of a handprint. But too long. Too narrow. Not human. In her final known journal page before it too went blank, "David is with us. But David is not returning. We are walking through what remembered him. Not a ghost. A memory pressed into stone until it could walk again." Jay walked ahead without waiting for the others. Eddie followed. Marina stood last. Unsure. Looking up at the stone ceiling she once thought closed. Whispering, almost to the wall itself. "If I lay down here quietly, will it remember me kindly?" The wall, of course, did not answer. But the air behind her exhaled. A gentle breath. Too soft to fear. Too familiar not to follow. Grief underground is quiet. It doesn't weep or scream. It waits. By the evening of the 3rd day, they reached a chamber they hadn't mapped, but recognized. There, in the dim amber glow of failing candles and shallow breath, lay David's coat. Folded, not discarded or dropped, but set. Arranged. Beside it, a silver Zippo lighter. Partially open. Still glossy from warmth. 3 spent candles ringed the coat in a perfect triangle. Evenly spaced. Completely burnt to the base. The room was otherwise undisturbed. No scuff marks. No signs of panic or fall. Just a clearing. Prepared. Remembered. Jay didn't speak. Eddie didn't ask. The tape recorder, strapped now to Eddie's belt, crackled when lifted. A series of faint breaths. One isolated click. Then silence again. Marina knelt beside the small camera that had been set gently against the base of the coat. The same one David had used since the day they entered. She picked it up. shook it slightly. Inside, one undeveloped frame. Later analysis revealed not a blur, not blackness, but overexposure. White, like someone had pointed into a light source that didn't exist underground. He didn't leave, Marina whispered. He was taken politely. Jay looked at her without speaking. That was the moment he began counting again. Softly, at first unconsciously. 9, 8, 7. The words trailed off his tongue like a heatless melody. Eddie snapped his fingers in front of him. Jay, he said firmly. You're doing it again. Jay blinked. Paused. Sorry. It helps me breathe. The chamber they had entered featured unusual acoustics. Even soft steps sounded distant, displaced. Sound didn't return from your voice. It folded inward, as if the cave was keeping it. Eddie tried marking the chamber with wax. A spiral and 3 lines, as before. But when they returned minutes later from a short exploration of the next fork, the spiral had changed. It faced the other way. The 3 lines were now 4. None of them had stopped to alter anything. Minutes, maybe hours later, time was elastic by now, they passed through a gallery of thin columns. Long mineral rods, side by side like organ pipes. There were 31 of them. Marina counted. Jay counted too, but he only said 34, 33, 32, as if marking something else entirely. David's name was not spoken again, not because they forgot, but because mention of him felt like an invitation. In the last leftward fork of that chamber, Marina found something carved deep into the wall. Not etched, pressed. Marks left not by tools, but perhaps fingernails or bone. Symbols, spiral-based again, but with crossbars dissecting their flow. Broken loops, interrupted arcs. In the center, in charred wax, was a word she didn't recognize, though it felt familiar in her body when she read it. A funeral word in Bengali that translates to oblation. A ritual for offering to the dead. Or to the forgotten. Jay stared at it silently, and after a long breath finally spoke again. My grandmother used to press oil into rice with that word. Before our dead were buried. He didn't question why it was here. No one did. Later, in her return journal, Marina wrote, "The cave gives back what we bring, but it keeps what decides to stay." David stayed, or something became him. Jay, by then, had grown exceedingly still. Not catatonic, attentive, but detached. He would not eat, would not drink. He walked with them, obeyed instructions. But his candle, Marina noted, never flickered. It stood unnaturally tall, bright, still, as if it wasn't burning at all. Eddie suggested doubling back, to follow their thread line, retrace. But Marina pointed out the problem with that path. The knot we tied twice, we reached it again. 3 times now, but we've never turned around. Jay offered a suggestion in his low, sleep-heavy voice. Maybe we're not turning. Maybe the cave is spiraling around us. None of them responded. But Eddie's fingers trembled that night when he tried lighting a new candle with the Zippo. It sputtered, wouldn't catch. Marina kneeled beside him, struck a match. The new candle burned, but the flame arched sideways, pulled gently toward the tunnel ahead. "Down," she said. "This place wants us down." That night they resettled in a space shaped like a bowl, smooth-lined, dry, warm enough to allow deep rest. Jay fell asleep sitting straight. Eddie turned the recorder back on briefly. Soft breath filled the background. He spoke only once. The only thing left from the tape recovered later. There's no longer wind. But the air still shifts, like the lungs of something asleep have just begun to dream. They all dreamed that night. The same image, different for each person, but always centered on David. For Eddie, David sitting calmly in a field, holding a candle that wept wax, but not flame. For Marina, David calling her name underwater. For Jay, David counting bricks, one by one. Backward, the room did not feel haunted. It felt patient, which somehow was worse. When they woke, Jay was smiling faintly, eyes open. "Still, it's ready now," he said. He didn't explain what or who. And the spiral on the opposite wall revealed a new passage, long, wide, and gently sloping downward. It hadn't been there the night before. At least, that's what they told themselves. Marina stopped once to trace her fingers along the freshly revealed limestone. She found something under the surface, a groove in the shape of a handprint, but too long, too narrow, not human. In her final known journal page before it too went blank, "David is with us." But David is not returning. We are walking through what remembered him. Not a ghost. A memory pressed into stone until it could walk again. Jay walked ahead without waiting for the others. Eddie followed. Marina stood last, unsure, looking up at the stone ceiling she once thought closed, whispering, almost to the wall itself, "If I lay down here quietly, will it remember me kindly?" The wall, of course, did not answer, but the air behind her exhaled. A gentle breath, too soft to fear, too familiar not to follow. The room was wrong in ways they didn't have vocabulary for. It was large, not cavernous, not majestic, but deliberate, as though shaped by quiet hands for a single purpose. A perfect circle, smooth-floored, polished in a way that no natural process could explain. There were no carvings, no markings, no debris. Only silence. Even their own movements vanished in this place. Footsteps fell flat. Whispered names did not return. Even the click of Eddie's recorder failed to echo. Sound had volume, but no rebound. The moment they crossed the arched threshold, they all felt it. Not fear. Recognition. Jay exhaled visibly and walked to the center of the chamber without hesitation. His candle still burned, but the wax hadn't melted. The wick seemed locked in time. "This is what it was shaped for," he said, calmly. "It already started remembering us before we entered." The mound in the middle was small, only 2 feet high, shaped like a cairn, a pile of hardened reddish candle wax fused over what might have been cloth or stone, or, somehow worse, neither. Dust-free, as if frequently touched or watched. No signs of collapse. No teeth marks or footprints. Just stillness that hummed inward. Marina was the only one who refused to enter at first. She stood at the threshold, eyes on the walls that curved around them, hands pulled tightly to her chest. "It's not an ending," she murmured. "It's a sentence, waiting for its subject." Eddie didn't understand. He walked slowly to the mound, knelt beside it. He set down the field recorder, facing upward. He didn't press play. He didn't speak. He just left it there. It fell silent after 2 minutes, even with the mic exposed. The only sound on playback would later be described by preservationists as paper tearing slowly underwater, under breath. Somewhere in the stillness, Jay whispered something like a prayer, but not one of theirs. One he hadn't been taught. "Counting backward leads forward," he said. That's what they meant. He began listing numbers, quietly but boldly, like he was calling roll for a class about to begin. 5, 4, 3. On 2, he turned to face the wall and stepped forward. No one stopped him. And then he wasn't there. There was no entry, no light. He didn't vanish or fall. He simply folded out of view, as if cut cleanly from time, like a page torn mid-sentence. Eddie looked back at Marina. She stood frozen, staring at where Jay had been. "It's copying breath," she whispered. To learn the voice next, Eddie reached out for her hand, and that's when he heard it. Not from her, not from the chamber, not inside, but next to him. A whisper, soft, warm, without tone. "Eddie." He turned. No one, nothing, just the smooth curve of the wall. "Eddie." The voice came again, but not from outside. It came from his own mouth. But he hadn't spoken. Marina recoiled. "It's not echoing," she said. "It's playing." That's when Eddie understood. The room was not silent. It was working, listening, recording, repeating, remembering, not from sound, but from shape, the way they moved, where they paused, how breath escaped their mouths and disturbed the air in the slightest ways. The room wasn't still. It was shaping a replica of every action. The red wax mound began to glisten faintly, not melting, but warming. A slow shimmer like heat haze, but with no source. Marina stepped inside then, slowly, softly, all pretense abandoned. She stood by the edge of the mound and lay down exactly beside it, not quite touching. "You can leave when it forgets your voice," she said. But not before. Eddie asked what she meant. She didn't reply, or perhaps she did, but not with sound. Her breath slowed, chest rising and falling with unnatural rhythm. Synchronized, not hers. He waited 20 minutes. The candle he carried dissolved, then hardened again, in reverse, as if time pulsed wrong here. On his recorder, breath noises began again, but they weren't his, nor Jay's, nor Marina's. Short bursts, matching clock ticks, and then a sound like counting, but not human, like the idea of numbers, unspoken, We're trying to decide what to become. The final note in Eddie's journal, scratched into the inner spine without clarity or structure. We find the things that want to be found, even if they are us, even if we were never here to begin with. And then he walked out, not from the room, but from himself. Marina would resurface 3 days later, barefoot, mucus-dried, and half-starved, emerging from a section of Wind Cave that hadn't been open in over 40 years. The Rangers were stunned. This entrance had been sealed with rock after a controlled cave-in in the early 1920s. Yet there she stood, stooped, blinking blindly into sunlight. She spoke no words, only breath. When examined, her journal contained just one entry written 7 times across multiple pages. One voice in, one voice out, nothing else. To this day, no structure like the Whispering Room has been found. Nothing matching the Red Mound. No walls that erase sound. But in the restricted Ranger reports of 1966, one note stands out. Logged by a night monitoring team after the filing of noise complaints from a campsite above ground. Shallow subrumble beneath Gate 4. One Ranger wrote, "No seismic activity. Just air moving. No source. Sounded local. Something deep, counting. In Wind Cave, breath is patient. It doesn't rush. Doesn't chase. It waits for silence. And once it has that, it begins to remember." When she emerged, they said it felt like a dream dying. October 31st, 1963. 3.5 days after the last known point of contact, Marina Tallman stepped barefoot out of the forested ridge south of Wind Cave's restricted Sector 34B. She was gaunt but standing. Her fingernails were broken, her palms dull with smeared wax residue, as though she had been holding something too long. She did not cry. She did not run into the arms of the ranger who first noticed her walking across the gravel access road. She stopped, blinked once in the sunlight, and whispered, "Where is the silence?" They took her to a ranger substation 20 miles southwest, close enough to Rapid City for proper medical attention. She did not speak again for 41 hours. There were no signs of dehydration or head trauma, no immediate injury, and no explanation, geological or otherwise, for how she had reached a sealed chamber whose last documented entrance had caved in around 1922. When asked about the others, she remained silent. When asked about herself, her body tensed, as though trying to hold inside something too large for language. She would later write on a scratch pad, "I came back because I didn't speak." The search resumed that same day. 14 ranger staff descended into Wind Cave via the gate the group had originally entered. They followed every log, every map trail, every possible break. They found clear evidence of travel, footprints, rope strands, a few wax-dripped stones near gallery rung. But no wax room, no spiral below, no thread needle, and not a single trace of Eddie Tallman, Jay Algernon, or David Elmer. Their trail vanished at the midpoint, a corridor that folded into stone. Dead ending isn't unusual, one longtime ranger remarked decades later. But a path that ends with no return? That's rare. Too clean. Marina spent 6 days in observation. The medical team found no signs of hypothermia. Her blood work was stable, but she would not sleep. Not fully. When she did, her pulse slowed to such a quiet rate that, twice, nurses believed she'd passed. What's more, her breath mimicked something unnatural. Shallow, deliberate, measured in a beat just slower than her body should need. As if sinking to something else. They asked her one final time what happened in the cave. She said only this: "If you say your name out loud, it can't forget you." In her satchel, the only object recovered intact was a small strip of wax-smeared burlap. Inside, folded precisely into 3 creases, was a single fragment of notebook paper. It read, "We took 4 names in. We brought 1 voice out. The cave didn't take us. It remembered too well." Wind Cave remains a national park. It is visited by tens of thousands each year. They tour paved trails, gaze into gypsum flowers and velvet walls. Guides speak softly, reverently, about the Lakota origin story, of the people who emerged from the breath of the earth. Most do not hear anything strange. But some say if you stop speaking in the deeper corridors, truly stop, the air doesn't just fall still. It pulls inward. The sound of your last word drawn back, reversed, like something behind the wall trying to learn it. Not malicious, not angry, only curious. only breathing. As of 2025, Marina Tallman is still alive. She resides in a long-term care home in western South Dakota. She does not share her story. She paints spirals, steadily, slowly, often in sets of 3. Clockwise, counterclockwise, broken. When asked what they mean, she smiles. They are paths. The first tells you where you went. The second tells you where you became. The third tells you what waited for you to return. She does not answer questions about what she saw in the final room. But sometimes, underneath her breath, she counts. Never aloud. Never higher than 3. Of the recorder recovered from her belongings, conservators salvaged 9 minutes of near silence, each minute ending with a subtle sound. Not screaming, not footsteps, but something like paper folding over itself, inside a breath. And at timestamp 6:34, a voice, faint, sexless, and worn smooth of accent, is heard repeating, "Return, return, then silence." There are names missing from the ranger registry, paperwork gone, photos lost, tapes mislabeled or magnetically erased. But still, folklore keeps things alive. Rangers now advise young visitors not to speak in unmarked chambers. Some repeat a ritual, pressing a red stone to cracked walls before entering narrow corridors. They say if you find a candle still standing, untouched by flame, you should leave it. You were not the one it was lit for. Wind Cave has no ghosts, no cold spots, no howls, but the wind still changes without warning. And sometimes, it smells faintly of candle wax. On very still days, people say, you can reach the back edge of a tour group and hear something personal in the quiet. Not your name, not your voice, something waiting to become both. Not all places are haunted. Some are faithful. They remember. They wait. And when they hear your voice, they begin to breathe. If that gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights off and hit subscribe, or the next photo might have you in it. Tap the bell. The next story drops soon.